For all its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. A road trip is joy and wonder, but it's not a game. You must keep your eyes open and your head sharp, because the same road that gives you freedom can also take it away. A GPS won't warn you when the road's washed out or the weather's turning. It doesn't care if the highway's closed or you're driving into a storm. There's no blinking arrow that'll bring you back once you're too far gone. Let's venture back to the savage wilderness where survival is earned, not given. This is Outdoor Disasters. For the Kleins, their road trip would be treacherous. Karen Klein, 46, her husband Eric, and their 10-year-old son Izzy were on vacation, far from their home in Pennsylvania. Eric was a social worker, and Karen taught environmental science at the local college. The Kleins were a typical suburban family. They had their dogs, their birds, and a steady routine. Every so often, they'd break away from it, take a trip, and find some time just for the three of them. It was their way of keeping close, of making memories. This time, they'd flown out to Las Vegas. It wasn't about gambling, but about the sights, the sounds, and all the family-friendly attractions the city had to offer. They landed, picked up the rental car, and checked into their hotel. For Izzy, it was a new world, bright, loud, and thrilling. They visited the Wax Museum, had plans to catch a Cirque du Soleil show, and strolled down the strip, letting the boy soak it all in. His eyes were wide, taking in the wild colors and the dizzying lights, as his parents followed close behind, amused and happy. For the Kleins, this was the sort of thing they'd always done as they traveled often. They were a team, and that's how they'd always been. Eric and Karen shared the responsibilities of the family, as Eric became a stay-at-home dad when Izzy was younger, and together, they raised him with patience and kindness. With the rental car ready, they decided to make the most of their time out west. Zion, Bryce Canyon, the Grand Canyon, 3 days to hit the highlights, check off the landmarks, and return to Vegas for the show on the 24th. It was a tight schedule, but it would be worth it. On the morning of December 22nd, they set off. The car rolled through the desert, and the landscape opened up around them. Red rock spires, mesas, and canyons dusted with a thin layer of snow. The Kleins didn't have time to linger. They were just passing through Bryce Canyon, enough to get a sense of it, enough to drink in the views from the car. Eric, still recovering from a broken back after an accident last year, couldn't handle much more than that. But even from the car, it was something to see. Then they were off again, heading south to the Grand Canyon for just an hour. Enough time to stop at the gift shop, grab a souvenir, take a few pictures, and get back on the road. It was odd to visit the Grand Canyon for such a brief time, but that was the plan. Quick, efficient, and back to Vegas for the show. They weren't looking for trouble, just a few good memories. Then the GPS threw them a curve. The main road to the North Rim was closed, so the navigation system redirected them onto a smaller, less traveled route. Forest Road 22. It started as cracked asphalt, winding through the trees, and they turned off, figuring it would get them where they needed to go. But as the road narrowed and the scenery shifted, the Klein's trip began to take a different turn. Parched scrub gave way to dark pines. Snow lay in wet, slushy banks along the road, snaking through the trees, twisting and winding its way deeper into the forest. The drizzle started, spattering the windshield, and young Izzy stared out at the crooked, wind-bent evergreens. Their branches twisted stark against the pale, cold sky. It was beautiful, but there was something about it, something that made him feel uneasy. The vast, endless forest beside them, and the road cut through like a knife. The Kleins drove on, following the GPS, deeper and deeper into the woods. They hadn't passed another car since they turned off the highway half an hour ago. Karen glanced at the GPS. The screen blinked, then flickered, and the map vanished. The blue arrow, the one that was them, was gone. No signal, it read. The Kleins were optimists. That was their way. So they kept on, figuring they'd pick up the signal again soon enough. It was a mild irritation, nothing more. If they drove a little further, everything would straighten out. That was the way they saw it. Stay positive. Keep moving. But the road felt wrong, the turns tighter, the forest thicker, and they were still alone. Asphalt turned to gravel and the gravel turned rough. They could hear it crunch under the tires. Karen and Eric exchanged a look. This didn't make sense. They'd thought the Grand Canyon was a sure thing, a place you couldn't miss. But this wasn't right. The road felt more like a trail, something cut for cattle. They stopped and decided it was time to turn around and head back. It would take longer and eat into their time, but it was better than getting lost out here. Eric brought the car to a halt. He began a three-point turn, twisting the wheel, easing the car backward. Then the back wheels slipped off the road, down into a shallow ditch. He tried to pull forward, but the tires spun, spraying mud. They had no traction. They got out and tried everything. Rocked the car, pushed, slipped branches and clothes under the wheels, anything to give the tires a grip. Eric pumped the gas. Karen and Izzy heaved from behind, but the car wouldn't budge. The mud held it fast. In a moment, everything changed. The easy, ordinary day, the simple drive, turned into something else. Now they were stuck, alone in the woods, miles from anywhere. That is only in the movies when the car keeps getting more and more stuck no matter what you try. And that's when it was more like, oh, this is not good, Karen said. It was 3 p.m. The Kleins were stranded, stuck in the snowbound forest somewhere north of Grand Canyon National Park. No cell reception, no sign of another car, and no hope of help on that remote back road. They understood how serious it was, but the Kleins weren't ones to sit and wallow. They set their minds to work, thinking of what to do next. So they stayed calm and tried to figure out a way forward. Karen and Eric checked the GPS before it failed. They were maybe a few miles from the main road. If one of them could reach it on foot, they'd find a car or at least pick up a signal. As for who would go, there was no question. Karen was the runner, still fit and strong. Eric was recovering from a broken back, so it had to be her. She didn't argue, didn't feel fear, it was natural. I'll go. Eric, stay with Izzy, I'll run out, find someone or get a signal and we'll call for help, Karen declared. She filled her pockets with snacks and a bottle of water, dressed in jeans, a fleece and a lightweight jacket. It wasn't perfect for the cold, but it would have to do. She hugged Izzy and Eric, said she'd see them soon and was off. The plan was simple, straightforward, she thought as she trudged down the road. The drizzle turned to snow, and 2 hours later, the wind picked up. The flurries whipped around her head as she walked, her hands buried deep in her pockets. She kept glancing at her phone, hoping for a signal, but there was none. Still, she was sure the main road was close. There would be traffic there, a car to flag down. When she reached the road, it was plowed, with tire tracks clear in the snow. She could wait for a car or keep walking. She chose to walk, believing she'd get a bar of service, make a call, and get them all out of this mess. She moved along the side of the road, scanning the dusk for headlights. Snow had settled on the ground, thickening underfoot, and the cold began to seep through her sneakers. This isn't going well, she thought, but she kept her head up, believing she'd find a signal. Someone would come, and this would all be over soon. But it was getting darker, and she realized it was too late to turn back, so she kept walking. Back at the car, Eric and Izzy were getting worried. Night was falling, and there was still no sign of Karen. It felt wrong. Eric decided to look for her. He switched on the flashlight on his phone, shining it down the road, following her footprints into the dark. Snow fell softly, and the cold bit at their faces. They called out, but their voices were swallowed by the trees. "Help!" they yelled, but it felt like calling into a void. There was no one there, and the trail was empty. They trudged on, Izzy peering into the darkness, but all he saw was the white ribbon of the road and the zigzag of his mother's tracks. After 3 hours, Eric stopped. They couldn't go any further. It was too dangerous, and Karen was likely miles ahead. Eric's priority was Izzy. They had to turn back. It was a hard choice. Wherever Karen was, she was on her own now. It was past 9 at night, and Karen kept moving. The blizzard was worsening, and she was exhausted. Her joints ached, her stomach growled, and her phone still showed no service. The battery was running low. She'd been walking for over 6 hours, and there was no sign of a single car, not even a park ranger. Why is there no traffic, she wondered. The cold stung her, but she pressed on, hoping to find something, anything to lead her out. Then she came to a fork in the road. Two paths, both dark, both empty. She didn't know which way to go. Turning back wasn't an option, and she felt the weight of the choice, left or right. She took a breath, her breath misting in the air, and looked around. Snow swirled, twisting in eddies around her, and then she saw a small animal popping out of the snow. To Karen, it seemed unreal, almost like it was laughing, and then it ran down one of the roads. Am I hallucinating? Is this how it ends? She thought, but the animal felt real, and there was nothing else to guide her. So she followed it. The snow fell harder, the wind howled, and she kept moving. After a mile, she hit another fork, and there it was again, the same weasel darting through the snow, leading her down the road. She didn't question it, she just lowered her head and followed. The night deepened, the wind died, and all she could hear was the crunch of her footsteps. The strange little guide had vanished, leaving her alone in the silence. Finally, she reached a clearing. Up ahead, silhouetted against the dark, she saw a shape she recognized. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Karen saw a small road sign up ahead. She was exhausted, hungry, and cold. Ice had packed into her shoes, numbing her feet. She knew she had to stop for the night. She had been walking for almost 12 hours, and her body was giving out. She needed to rest. Karen had some experience in the wild. Years back, she'd been an environmental educator, teaching kids basic survival skills, how to build a shelter and which plants you could eat. Simple things, but enough to get by. She found a spruce tree, low and heavy with boughs, and crawled under it. She pulled the branches down around her, snapping them off and spreading them over the snow, wrapping them tight around herself. She knew she shouldn't sleep, knew the cold could kill her if she drifted off, but she had to keep warm, had to hold on. Wrapped in the coarse, prickly branches, she hunkered down, grinding a few spruce needles between her teeth, trying to forget the hunger gnawing at her belly. The bitter taste coated her mouth, but it was better than nothing. She pulled out her phone, hoping for a miracle, but the screen showed a blinking red battery. Then it went black. Just like that, her last link to the outside world was gone. It was a blow, a punch to the gut. She had counted on that phone, on getting a signal, and now it was just her, alone in the dark. Karen shriveled as the cold gnawed at her. She was dehydrated, but she knew eating snow would worsen her core temperature even further. So she took 2 small balls of ice and tucked them into her cheeks, letting them melt slowly. It was something, a small trick, but it kept her from freezing up inside. She couldn't let herself sleep. She knew it would lower her heart rate, slow her down, and open her to the cold. Hypothermia could creep in, and she wouldn't wake up. She guessed it was still 5 hours until sunrise. She just had to hold on, stay awake, keep breathing. She kept talking to herself, repeating over and over, "No, no, no, this isn't it. I'm not going to die like this. I can't put Izzy and Eric through this. I won't sit here and freeze to death." She knew the stakes, but she refused to believe this was how her story would end. It's 7 a.m. on December 23, 2016, in Kaibab National Forest, Arizona. The morning after a blizzard, the land is buried under 8 inches of snow. Karen is cold and shivering under a heap of spruce branches. She stands slowly, her body stiff and aching, her joints like ice. She's exhausted, hungry, and weak, her feet numb from the cold, packed tight with ice in her shoes. But she forces herself to move, each step a struggle through the knee-deep snow. The muscles in her legs burn, and every part of her wants to stop, but she can't. It's not just her life on the line. I wasn't going to give up. It was never, I'm going to die here. It was, I have to get help for Izzy. I have to get help for Eric, she proclaimed. Around the same time, Izzy stirs awake in the back seat, curled under a jacket. He hears the engine running and feels the warm air blowing through the car. Izzy sits up and looks outside at the snow-laden terrain surrounding him. A landscape of endless snow. That image would stay with him, burned into his mind. Eric looks back at him. He hasn't slept, his eyes dark and tired. He's calm, but serious as he starts laying out the plan for the day. They'll run the car to stay warm, drink what's left of the juice and water, and not open the doors for anyone unless they have a police or ranger badge. The plan was for Eric to set out, heading back the way they came and hopefully find a signal, car, or someone who could help. Izzy's shoes are ruined from last night's trek, and he had to walk the last few miles barefoot. There's no way he can walk now. He'd only slow his dad down, so Eric has to go alone, and neither of them likes it, but they have no choice. After a few last words, Eric climbs out of the car and starts up the road walking away, and Izzy watches him go until he can't see him anymore. Alone, Izzy feels the weight of it all. In his 10-year-old mind, he's grappling with the thought of living without his parents. Panic wells up inside him, strange, wild panic that he doesn't know how to control. He puts on music, cranks it loud, and screams the words, hoping it will drown out the fear. But it doesn't. The dread keeps creeping in, slow and heavy. Time drags, and each minute feels like an hour. He starts to pray. He sets a deadline in his mind. He wants to see his dad before 2 p.m. And if not, he thinks about giving up. He thinks about stepping out into the snow and letting it take him the way he imagines it took his mother. By now, he's convinced she's gone, and the thought of living without her is too much. But 2 p.m. comes and goes, and still no sign of Eric. Despite everything, Izzy waits. The minutes crawl by on the dashboard. Eric has been gone almost 7 hours now. Then he hears a distant sound, faint but real. Wiping his eyes, he squints through the windshield and sees flashing blue lights cutting through the white. A rescue team reached the location of the car. Izzy is relieved, and for the first time all day, he believes it might be okay. After leaving Izzy alone in the car, Eric walked for 20 miles or 32 kilometers back up the road and was able to receive cell service and call the emergency services. Shortly after that, the search and rescue team jumped into action. They picked up Izzy and Eric and took them to a hospital to treat their mild frostnip, while the rest of the team set out to find Karen. It was just past dawn on December 23, 2016. 25 miles or 40 kilometers southeast of where she left her family, Karen moved unsteadily through 10 inches of snow, her legs dragging, her steps slow. She was trembling, lips blue and cracked from the wind, and her left foot bare. The shoe had gotten soaked, so she'd taken it off, but now she limped, numb and staggering, dragging that cold foot behind her. She slipped and fell, sprawling in the snow. For a moment, she just lay there. Then she planted her gloved hands on the ground and forced herself up again, gritting her teeth. She had to keep moving. It was all in the mind, she told herself. At first light, she checked the road sign she'd stumbled on the night before. Grand Canyon Visitor Center, 6 miles. Just 6 miles. It gave her hope, believing everything would be all right after all. But as the morning wore on, each step got harder. The energy she'd felt at dawn was slipping away. By mid-afternoon, she had barely covered 3 miles. The sky had darkened, pewter gray clouds rolling in, and snow began to fall again, sticking to her lashes, blurring her vision. Her body ached, every muscle screaming with fatigue. She decided to break it down, walking for 20 seconds, then collapsing into the snow to rest. She kept that pattern all afternoon, hours stretching out before her like the endless road. She hardly noticed the light fading. Around 6, she sensed the trees thinning, and she lifted her head to see a gate with a cluster of wooden huts and cabins ahead. Relief surged through her. She stumbled to the gate, spotting a ticket kiosk about 50 meters ahead. "Is anybody here?" she called out, her voice hoarse, but there was no answer. She saw a cabin tucked in the woods, a pickup truck and a snowmobile parked outside. She staggered to the cabin door, knocked, waited, and pounded harder with her stiff, cold fists. Nothing. The place was empty. She glanced around, looking for another way in, and spotted a window. She had no choice. She had to get inside. Wrapping her jacket around her elbow, she smashed the glass, then climbed through, collapsing onto the floor, panting, her body shaking with exhaustion. She lay there for a few minutes, just breathing, then forced herself up. She tried to turn on a light, but there was no power. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw that the cabin was comfortable, clearly lived in. Someone had to come back, but she couldn't wait. She was starving and hadn't eaten since last night when she'd chewed on spruce needles. She made her way to the kitchen, rummaging through the cupboards. She found tins but no can opener. Her vision blurred and her hands fumbled. Drawers were pulled open and shut, over and over, and she couldn't focus. Everything was shaking, like looking through a camera when you're drunk, the way it wobbles and spins, she said. Giving up on the cans, she staggered over to the wood stove. If she couldn't find food, she'd at least try to get warm. But the search for matches was useless. She found none. Eventually, she opened a cupboard and pulled out a pile of woolen blankets. She wrapped herself in them, curled up on the sofa, knees to her chest, trying to keep the cold at bay. Her body was failing. She had walked 26 miles through a blizzard, and now she was nearing her limit. Her muscles had broken down, her kidneys were at risk, and the frostbite was creeping in, threatening gangrene. She didn't remember falling asleep, only the fast, hard thudding of her heart and her breath, heavy and ragged. She never allowed herself to think it was over, never thought she was going to die. "I have to get help for Izzy and Eric. They're waiting. They need me," she kept saying as she drifted off. It's 2 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Karen wakes from a restless sleep, her body shaking, her eyes struggling to focus. She hears voices outside the cabin and sees torch beams flickering through the curtains. She heard yelling, then pounding at the door. Her heart skipped. "Oh my God, it's the police," she thought. "I'm in trouble. I broke into this cabin," they called out, asking her to come to the door. Karen got up and opened it, hands in the air like she'd seen in every cop show. "Please don't arrest me. I broke the window. I'll pay for it, I promise," she said. But it wasn't the police. It was the search and rescue team, 5 park rangers who quickly assured her they were there to help. They started warming her up right away. One of them took her feet and pressed them against his bare stomach, letting his body heat thaw her frozen limbs. Another handed her a granola bar, telling her to eat it slowly. Dazed and confused, Karen managed to ask the only question that mattered. "Where are Izzy and Eric? Are they safe?" The answer brought a wave of relief like she'd never felt. They were safe, recuperating at a hospital nearby. The tension melted away, exhaustion washing over her, and she felt herself finally relax. They drove her to a hospital in Kaibab, where Eric and Izzy were waiting. After the rescue team picked up Izzy and Eric, they'd tracked her footprints to the Grand Canyon North Rim entrance booth, noticed the cabin with the broken window, and knew she was inside. The reunion was emotional, but it was clear Karen's ordeal wasn't over. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests and found her blood contained dangerously high levels of creatine kinase, an enzyme released when muscles break down. Her levels were off the charts, 50 times higher than a marathon runner after a race. They told her she was close to organ failure. "If they hadn't found me when they did, I would have died by the afternoon," she said. It wasn't the frostbite, it was her muscles giving out, her body breaking down. Karen was rushed to a larger hospital where surgeons worked to stabilize her, save her life, and treat the frostbite before it led to amputation. After 5 days, she was well enough to leave. The Kleins returned to Pennsylvania, but the recovery was far from over. Karen spent months enduring painful muscle regrowth, and her frostbitten foot healed slowly. But the hardest part wasn't the physical pain, it was the guilt. How could I have done this to my family? How did I put them through that? I can't believe we didn't just turn around when the GPS blanked out. Why didn't we make a different choice? She agonized. But as time passed, the guilt faded, replaced by a deep gratitude for life. The experience left Karen Klein with a new appreciation for the simple things, the quiet, everyday moments. For Izzy, the days alone in the car were a turning point. The trauma lingered, bringing anxiety and panic attacks, but with therapy, he learned to manage it. He found strength in remembering what his parents did for him and the lengths they went to. It was a hard lesson, but it brought them closer, and that bond was something he would carry with him always. What my mom did was just what she would always do. She is one of the most positive, the strongest people I know. And if my dad didn't act at the time he did, in the way he did, and with the efficiency that he did, then my mom would have died, and I would have lost hope. I think this event brought my family so much closer together in an odd way. The things that we do to survive are a reflection of how we feel every day. People love each other so much that at any time, they will walk 26 miles in 3 feet of snow to save you, or they will walk with a broken back to save you, Izzy reflected. As for Karen, the experience left her with a new appreciation for the simple things, the quiet, everyday moments, stating, "Even the ordinary is extraordinary. Just sitting down with a cup of tea and watching the birds, it's a profound experience. If you live chasing big, shiny things, you miss out on what's really important. You miss out on all the beauty, the happiness, the joy that's already around you." A road trip is a simple thing. Gas in the tank, the hum of tires on the blacktop, the open sky stretching out ahead. It's freedom. It's the feeling of moving forward, watching the miles fall away, and the world opening up before you. You get to know the country, its hard lines, and its soft edges. You learn to love it, and you learn to trust the road. But trust only goes so far. It's not enough to follow the blinking arrow on a screen. You have to look at the road signs and look at the sky. You have to know when to turn back, when to stop, and when to ask a stranger for directions. It's easy to get lost out there and think you're on the right path when you're not. And once you're lost, the road can turn cruel. It'll lead you into places you never meant to be, places you can't get out of. If you find yourself in a similar scenario, your car is your best shelter against the elements. It provides insulation from the wind and cold. Wandering off can be dangerous and make it harder for rescuers to find you. A stranded vehicle is much easier to spot from the air or by other drivers than a person on foot. If you need to leave for any reason, mark your trail so you can find your way back. If you have fuel, run the engine for 10 to 15 minutes every hour to conserve fuel while keeping warm. Ensure the exhaust pipe is clear of snow to avoid carbon monoxide poisoning. Use any extra clothing, blankets, or even floor mats to block drafts and stay warm. If you have newspapers or other materials, stuff them around doors and windows to keep the cold out. If you're with others, huddle together to share body heat. Take turns resting if you're alone to conserve energy. Tie a bright fabric or reflective tape to your antenna or a tree branch to signal distress. Write "help" in the snow if it's safe to step outside. Turn on hazard lights when the engine is running to make your car more visible. Stay hydrated. Eating snow is risky because it lowers your core temperature. Instead, melt snow by placing it in a bottle or cup and warming it against your body or using the car's heater. Eat small amounts of food periodically to keep your energy up. If you have no food, stay hydrated. The human body can survive longer without food than without water. Layer up and keep dry. Pack an emergency kit and keep one in your car at all times, including survival essentials. If you are confident you're close to help and the weather is manageable, you may decide to leave the vehicle temporarily. Dress warmly, take supplies, and mark your path back. If you must leave, write down where you are going and when you left. Place the note inside the car where it's easily visible to rescuers. And remember, don't panic. Survival is as much about mental strength as physical resources. Focus on one small task at a time, whether it's insulating the car, rationing supplies, or setting up a signal. Break the problem down into steps. A blizzard can turn lethal fast, but preparation, quick thinking, and patience can save your life. Keep these tips in mind every time you head out into uncertain weather, and never underestimate the power of a clear head and a steady hand to get through an outdoor disaster. If you've made it this far, please consider clicking those subscribe and like buttons. Want more outdoor disasters content? Check out these videos I believe you'll enjoy. Thank you for watching.